Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming to our first topic in our Let's Talk series. It's very important to our board and to our administration that we continue to create opportunities for you to hear kind of what it is that we are going to be doing in the district and give you an opportunity to ask questions and provide input. We're going to be recording these sessions for people who aren't able to be here in person. So once they're up, please feel free to share them out. And mark your calendars now. We have a talk each month. So in September, we're going to be talking about inclusion of AI in the education setting. And in October, we're going to be looking at how the classrooms and staff handle student conflict or behavior challenges that come up in the classroom. Tonight, we're going to start with the facilities plan that's currently under consideration. Dr. Howard and Treasurer Johnson are going to share that plan with you. And we're also fortunate enough tonight to have a few leaders in the industry that ask to answer specific questions for you. We have Tony Shore and Dan Miller from Shore Architects and Mike Mancini with Russilli Construction. Thank you for taking time out of your busy nights, especially with school getting ready to start, and a giant thank you to our presenters for sharing your evening with us. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Shepard, and again, thank you all for being willing to come out and spend an hour with us and learn more about the potential facilities plan. As Mrs. Shepard had shared, these are being recorded, so by all means, please feel free to share those. We want to get as much, want to get the word out as much as we can and try to inform people of, some of the rationale behind maybe some of the suggestions. And just to kind of level set here, the district had hired a consulting firm named HPM. This was largely done 2 years ago, involved lots of stakeholder input, and they did analysis of the district, made some recommendations. This past year, you'll learn more about how we've been engaging with OFCC, and we'll explain all about that here momentarily. But it's sort of revised some of those initial recommendations from HPM. But our goal here tonight, if we'd like to leave you with something, and we hope that you have an understanding of the Ohio Facilities Construction Commission, the process and what's involved in partnering with them and how that can benefit us. Identifying needs, existing buildings, conditions and the ages, enrollment projections, a review of the recent facility master planning recommendations, a proposed master plan, and then share with you sort of timelines and next steps. So at this point, I'll turn it over to Todd to explain the OFCC.
Okay, so OFCC is Ohio Facilities Construction Commission, and it's something you might not have heard of, something that we've not been able to take advantage of here in Marysville yet, but it is something that it looks like we're going to be able to take advantage of very soon. So that's something we're exploring right now. It's a state agency that gives money to school districts to build school buildings. So if you've ever driven, you're thinking you're out in the middle of nowhere and you drive by this great campus, an amazing school building, you're like, well, how did this community afford to build this school? It was probably the OFCC. So that's money that is very beneficial to schools and something we want to take advantage of, and we'll talk a little bit about how we plan to do that. There's two different programs within the OFCC. The first is called CFAP. That's a program we're not yet eligible for, so that's not what we're going to be looking at. The other program is called ELP. In lieu of me reading every word on this slide, I'm just going to give you the real high level what ELP means, and to me, it's basically Kohl's Cash, and a lot of it. So basically the same way Kohl's Cash works, you have to spend some of your own money first, and then they're going to give you some money on the back end. That's what the ELP program is. We're looking at a couple different phases of programs. So we're going to be talking about phase one of our construction facilities plan here. So we would do phase one fully funded by the district. So what would the OFCC would then turn around and give us funding through that ELP program, which would be able to fully fund phase 2. And we'll talk a little bit more about what that would look like in some future slides here. A couple different things with the ELP program. If you've ever heard me drone on about state funding, there's some similarities here with the ELP program. So I've talked about with state funding, as we look wealthier as a district because our property values go up, because our median incomes go up, we get less state funding. Well, the same thing applies to the ELP program and OFCC. As we get wealthier compared to other districts in the state, our percentage share will go down. Right now, we're at a 56% share. What that means is we would get basically 56% credit for all of the money we spend on phase 1. The longer we wait to take advantage, 54%. The longer we wait to take advantage of this program, that percentage is likely going to go down because, again, people are coming here. We're going to be continuing to look wealthy compared to other districts across the state. Also, we have a 12-month period to secure that funding with that program, and we'll talk a little bit about the timeline as we go as well. But again, we have to. The program requires that we have a ballot issue to acquire funding to do the facilities program. We'll have a 12-month time period to lock that in, basically. A couple other guidelines with the OFCC and the ELP program. OFCC will only support buildings that have a minimum of 350 students. They don't want to, basically looking at efficiency. They don't want to put a bunch of money into a building that's not going to house a certain number of kids. That comes into play with Raymond Elementary and what we're going to be looking at doing there. Also, the state recommends not basically, if you look at the cost to renovate a building, if it costs 67% to renovate a building compared to the cost of just building a brand new building, they're going to recommend you don't renovate, just go ahead and build new. You don't want to put a bunch of money into a building that's not going to, you could get a brand new building for a similar cost. So that also comes into play with some of the buildings we're looking at. And there's certain programs, certain aspects of a building that the OFCC wouldn't fund. So basically, there's certain non-academic things that wouldn't be funded or wouldn't be credited with the ELP program. And finally, with the OFCC, this is just gives you an idea of some of the things they're looking at. I'm not going to read these, but really what this is showing is that when the OFCC is involved, they want to make sure that you're ending up with a very quality project. They want to build a building or renovate a building that's going to last you many decades. So I think turn this back over to Zach to look at our current buildings.
Thank you. So if you look at the original constructions or additions timeline here, you'll see that Raymond Elementary, probably not surprising to those of you that are familiar with the district. The oldest portion of that building that is no longer in use at Raymond was built in 1914. There have been additions to that, most recently in 2001. The next, if you look at Edgewood Elementary, which I'm a very proud Edgewood alum myself, the original portion of that building was built in 1957, right? And so you can see that over the years, there's been a lot of things that have been added to or have continued to try to make it viable. You can go on Mill Valley, Naven, Northwood, Creekview, Bunsold, Early College, Marysville High School. You can see the dates for those. Here momentarily, we'll share with you, a recommendation, but our plan initially is really to address some deferred maintenance across the district. But the biggest issues are we have to address Raymond Elementary, and we certainly have to address Edgewood Elementary. And so we're going to get into that as we go. Now, as Todd was sharing, if you go back one slide and you looked at all these 23 systems or components, the OFCC has a manual, if you will. And part of that manual is they want to make sure that in the building that if you're renovating it, that you're bringing those systems up to the current code. And so whereas you might say, well, the HVAC system might only be 20 years old, well, in the state's eyes, that's going to be a failing system, and it's going to need to be replaced at some point in time. So the costs start to add up. Now, if you look at OFCC and they have come in to do an audit, if we were to renovate all of these systems that are part of that manual, in their analysis, you can see the dollar figures to the right. Obviously, there's a lot of money tied into that. Now, this is simply not necessarily what has to be done. This is the state commission saying, hey, if you were to bring everything up to current code, this would be the cost. Now, we're not recommending that for all these buildings. One of the driving factors in this is obviously growth. And regardless of where you stand on growth in Marysville, and I know some people have very strong opinions about that, the reality is, as a district, we need to educate all of our kids that come through our doors, and we are growing. And if you look at our historical enrollment data just over the last 10 years, you'll see that we have grown by 444 students. So HPM, 2 years ago, OFCC, or the state, has recently conducted an analysis as well, and both of their numbers were very similar. And we are projected to increase enrollment by 914 students over the next 10 years. So if you think about it, that's double the clip, if you will, of what we've seen as far as enrollment increases over the last 10 years. Our projected enrollment, if we look out into 23-25 school year, where do those 914 additional students attend along with our other district students? You'll see that where we are currently, PK, that would be our Mini Monarch Academy, our preschool, K-5, 3,000 or close to 3,000 students, so increasing by 300 some. 6-8, you see increasing by approximately 300, and then 9-12, close to a little over 300 as well. So a broad distribution. The recommended improvements from HPM, again, this was shared, kind of culminated around 2 years ago, but their recommendations were to build a new middle school. We're going to get into that here momentarily, a little more in depth. And something that is really important to understand is that it costs a district the most money to build high schools. And that's because the square footage is more. You have to allocate more square footage in the classrooms. Hallways need to be wider. Areas like cafeterias need to be larger. So I think everybody understands that. The next most costly building to construct are the middle schools. The cheapest options are elementaries. And 2 years ago, they estimated that building a new middle school in those dollars, that at that time would be around $75 million. An elementary, Edgewood Elementary, they estimated at $45 million, right? And so you can see the recommendations that were here. One was to demo the oldest portion at Raymond and then add a new addition. There was a recommendation to build a new bus depot or bus garage at Raymond Elementary. We think at one point in time there was discussion about keeping buses there and potentially initially making Raymond a K-8 building. Now, when we shared that with the community and especially members of Raymond, that didn't go over very well. They really want, the Raymond community wants their kids to assimilate with the rest of the Monarchs, just like everybody else does from varying elementaries across the district. So again, while this was a recommendation early on, we're sharing this just so that you kind of have a historical background of why we're making some different recommendations this evening. So as far as the proposed master plan, there's some key items here. And I'm going to do this just so I can reference our bulleted list here. One of the things that we heard loud and clear from the stakeholders is the idea of eliminating an intermediate school. So instead of 4 transitions from elementary to intermediate to middle to high school, going to a more traditional breakdown or grade banding, which is what is more typical across districts, where you have K-5, a true middle school, 6, 8, and then high school. So there is some research that shows that that's better for student learning and outcomes. Less transitions can be ideal. No need to displace students while building is being built. So we referenced Raymond, we referenced Edgewood. We'll get into that a little more here this evening and talk to you about how we can keep kids in the building and still provide construction of new buildings nearby. That's huge when we have an enrollment crunch, because if we had to take a building offline, where would we house them? So that we're blessed in that we have the ability to do that. Less students will be bused across town to Creekview. So the initial suggestion from HPM was to make Creekview Elementary or intermediate school a new elementary school and build a new middle school somewhere else. The thoughts were potentially right beside Bunseled Middle School. Now the challenge there is now you are taking students from across the district and you're busing them all on site at, say, Bunseled. This plan that we're recommending creates a much more of a neighborhood school setting, right? And the other thing is, I share with you earlier the cost of building a new middle school. Well, the cost to renovate Creekview as a second middle school potentially is a significant savings to the district. But if Creekview were to become another elementary, and if you were to build another middle school, we know that we would probably make some parents upset in certain neighborhoods, because you would have to bus those students across town from somewhere in order to house that building that exists in Mill Valley. Does that make sense? And so this plan truly creates more of a neighborhood feel. Creekview as a middle school eases congestion. You know, if you have all your elementaries starting at the same time, just from a parent drop-off or busing standpoint, if you've been in Mill Valley during school, it gets very congested in there. Well, if you had, if you've got a middle school where more students can walk to it, because you would still have Bunseled as an option, you're not creating that log jam of traffic, if you will. The state share of the cost is estimated to be 54%, where the district will be issued a credit that could pay for a 6th elementary school at a time and location to be determined that would be more aligned with a neighborhood school. So as we talk about this, we have to consider the growth that's coming, project enrollment, and we're going to talk about Marysville East and Marysville South as examples. And we'll share more on that here coming up. This plan would provide more opportunities for kids. And this is something that we heard from our stakeholders too, is that as a growing district, you can only have one starting point guard for a boys or girls basketball team, one lead in a play. In this particular case, if you had 2 teams at a Creekview Middle School, one at Bunseled, then you create, you double the opportunities for kids, which I think is really important. We want kids to be involved. Renovating Creekview to a middle school would save the district considerably, as middle school construction costs are considerably higher than elementary school construction costs. It's a real fortunate thing in that when Creekview Intermediate was built, it was built to the specs of more of a traditional middle school and not to an elementary. So repurposing that building is allowable, but it also will save us considerable amounts of money. And then Mini Monarch Academy, which the district was required to absorb last year. Currently, we have a lease agreement with the county for a Harold Lewis building. But eventually, that lease agreement it's going to increase cost. And so it doesn't make sense for us to continue housing students and pay to lease for that. So we have a plan for Mini Monarch Academy that we'll share with you here momentarily too.
That's you. Yep, that's me. So Zach or Dr. Howard just showed you the original plan that was recommended by HPM. So, since that time, we've made the revisions like he talked about on this previous slide. So these are very preliminary cost estimates of the revised plan. So again, preliminary numbers, so keep that in mind. It's worth reiterating the savings that we talked about there. So the idea of building a high school being the most expensive building, a high school would cost well over $100 million. So the great thing with what we've done here, we had the state grant back in 2014. We got $12 million, and we renovated Early College High School. So now we've got plenty of high school space well into the future. So we don't need to build a $130 million high school. So with this plan, we also take away the idea of building a brand new middle school for $85 million. So again, saving our taxpayers money. So with this new revised plan, replacing Edgewood Elementary, $45 million that helps with capacity issues, allows for more growth, but also takes an aging building out of our rotation. Also replacing Edgewood Elementary. You can see there's the question of renovating existing Raymond versus building new. Again, those are preliminary numbers, but it appears that it's going to be significantly higher than that 67% cost threshold from the OFCC to renovate. So we would be looking at building a brand new building at Raymond. Again, the big savings of this plan is renovating Creekview into a middle school as opposed to an elementary with the other plan. Another big benefit with this plan, in the original plan, we had about $2.5 million set aside for deferred maintenance. When HPM did and OFCC did their tour of our buildings and kind of gave us a list of a lot of the deferred maintenance things that need to be fixed up, the number is well over $2.5 million. So with this savings that we have here, we're able to potentially push $10 million into the program to address some of those deferred maintenance items. And then also preschool accommodations at Edgewood Elementary, that would be about $5 million. As he showed on that earlier slide, currently we have over 270 preschool students. Previously, when we were forced to take over the Harold Lewis preschool, we only had about 60. So that's been definitely a big addition and added to our capacity issues into the future. So we're looking at a recommended project around $128 million, so well over a $20 million savings compared to the original estimate. And I think this one's you, Zach.
Yeah, so I think everybody in here can kind of fathom the size of Mill Valley, right? And, we actually have 3 buildings back in that neighborhood. If you look at the zoning, and that's what these, pictures represent, both Marysville East and Marysville South, combined, the number of units that are zoned for residential is every bit as big as Mill Valley. And so it goes without saying that we are absolutely going to have an elementary building on that side of town. And so when Todd was talking about Coles Cash, the beauty is that if this works out with OFCC, and we have no reason to believe that it would not, we would get a credit for those dollars that are spent. So that way there would be money set aside for a neighborhood building at a time and place that is ideal for the district. So this evening, can't stress enough that there's a lot of legwork that would need to go in, between now and when a facility plan would be submitted to OFCC to be approved. So that goes without saying, but we wanted to share some slides with you that shows conceptually how some of this could work. So if you look at the diagram on the right, or picture, overlay, if you will, you can see the property that is at Raymond Elementary. You can also see the building, obviously, and so that property is outlined in yellow. So there's two options for Raymond. One is we renovate, and Todd shared some preliminary numbers there with you, whereas a renovation does not, it's not much cheaper than what it would be to demo and build new. The other component here, we can't stress this enough, is that when we engage with OFCC and we learn that, the state could foot a lot of this and require less of local taxpayers, obviously as a district, we want to maximize those dollars as much as possible and create as little of a burden as we possibly can to our taxpayers. So again, this would show some additional items at Raymond. You can see the pink would be additions. If you have seen the main entrance at Raymond, the office space is very small, needs to be expanded. The renovation, if you were to demo the 1914 portion of the building, we would need to add some additional square footage there. That would certainly include expanding the cafeteria, kitchen area that's there currently. You can see the orange and blue would represent some additional parking. If you've been there on some of their evening events, parking can be hard to come by there. This document is just sort of another version of that. If we get into here, if you were to build a new Raymond Elementary, again, this is conceptual, but we've had conversations with architects to share with us, hey, what is feasible, what is possible? And again, knowing that as you were to build a new building, you still have to educate our kids. We can't take them, we can't find a new space, for a year and a half while construction occurs. So, you could potentially build a new Raymond Elementary, still keep students housed in the current building. This just shows eventually the parking could potentially be where the existing building is. Again, this is conceptual. It's just to show that this is feasible from the industry professionals that we've been having discussions with, but wanted to show the community that, what it could look like. Oh, I do see that. Thank you, Dan. Yeah. So this one would be a little more forward-facing, if you would, from the street. And I can see that. The other thing that I I know you added here is maybe a third wing, academic wing on the building. So we would think that as we build new buildings, keeping an eye toward, okay, if we had to expand in those areas, how could we do that? And I see that you've added that there too. Thank you, Dan. So looking at Edgewood Elementary, again, here's an overview of or a bird's eye view, if you will, of the current property and building. Just to maybe give you guys a point of reference, on the left-hand side, that is the old administrative offices. That's currently the 4th grade annex at Edgewood Elementary. And we've got plans to repurpose that into the mini Monarch Academy, which we'll show here momentarily. The yellow is an outline of the current buildings on the site. This shows, the green would show construction zone. Russilli was kind enough to walk the land with us and show us, okay, if we were to continue to house students here, how could we keep students safe, build construction fences, maintain construction, and keeping our kids safe while school continues. So you can see the construction zone would be within that green border there. You can see the pink area down at the bottom would be preschool. What's nice is that you could have separate offices. So there would be a preschool entrance, there would be a Edgewood Elementary entrance, but yet we would repurpose that annex that is really in great shape, and there's portions of it already that would make for a large part of a great mini Monarch Academy. With the new potential new 600 student elementary school, we would increase capacity by several students, but the wing of that building would be constructed as such that there would be preschool classrooms on this end of it. You can see that this would take place over stages, right? And you can see here, I think, is some of the parking layout initially as construction occurs. Now, one of the things I definitely want to draw to everybody's attention, you can see what appears to be a turf football field. We are absolutely not suggesting putting a field there, but we thought for our community to see how much green space could be created eventually when the current Edgewood building would be demoed. I know that if you drive past there in the fall and the spring, you see a lot of youth teams utilizing that space. There's lots of green space in front of what is suggested as a new Edgewood Elementary. A lot of great features there. One of the things that was nice when we walked the grounds was, our architects and Russilli as well kind of looked at the layout of the land and said, if this were a blank slate and we were going to add a building, the location sort of in that northwest corner there is ideal. Yep.
Back on that slide. Yeah. One thing I forgot to mention, so you can see there the plan for the preschool to be housed there. Some people might not be aware, the current 270 students are currently being educated at the existing Harold Lewis building, and the county was kind enough to give us basically a $1 lease for a certain amount of time, but that's not an indefinite amount of time. So in the near future, that will turn into a 6-figure lease. So there is a little bit of an urgency for this project and to create our own preschool space to avoid paying that lease.
Okay, if we look at Creekview Intermediate as potentially becoming a middle school, you can see on the left-hand side, that is sort of the entire campus for both Northwood and Creekview. And to the right is the actual Creekview building. One of the things when we had conversations with a stakeholder group about, hey, here is revised recommendations based on information provided by OFCC. One of the things that we heard was if you make it a middle school, you can't have a haves and a have-nots. You have to create as much apples to apples as you potentially can within reason, right? When you talk about it would be $85 million to build a new middle school, some of those things, at the end of the day, you can't just waste taxpayers' dollars either, right? So we can't just try to make it a brand new or a bunceled middle school. But what we can do, some people would go into Creekview and have every expectation that they would say, hey, this portion of this building is better. Or maybe this portion of the building is less, but Creekview has this, Bunceled has that. But one thing we heard loud and clear is if you had an auditorium and you've got performing arts and all the facilities at Bunceled, we need them at Creekview as well. And so some of the things that were really important is how do we increase gym space, like an auxiliary gym, which is what you see in the beige or the tan box there. How do you make sure you have adequate locker room facilities? You would have to add an auditorium, and if Bunceld's is, Ryan probably knows the exact seating in there. I don't know it offhand, but we wanted the exact same footprint. If they have the theater there, what would that same size theater be at Creekview? And that is what is shown on this document. The other thing is, from an athletic standpoint, if you have an athletic field at Bunceled, it wouldn't necessarily be fair for the students in the Mill Valley or Creekview Middle School to have to be bused for their after-school activities over at Bunceled. So again, this is conceptually, and there's several layouts that are going to show that it is feasible that you can put a track, you can put a regulation size field there. Something else that could be unique for Northwood students is, I'm sure the Northwood Elementary students would love to use this space in field days and things like that. So you would have sort of a campus type of feeling there. The other thing we heard from stakeholders was how nice would it be that if I lived in Mill Valley, my kindergarten student could, walk, ride their bike to school, all the way through 8th grade, and they wouldn't have to get on a bus until high school. And so parents love the idea of they don't necessarily have to be home from work in time to drive their kid to practice at 5 p.m. because they could come home, get a snack, and many of them would be able to walk or ride their bike back to the building. Again, just another layout. We've have several different variations just to show conceptually that there could be a field track on that site. One of the things that we would be very diligent about is currently that's a wooded area. Nobody likes to take trees down, so it's something we're mindful of. How do we preserve what we can there? Certainly be mindful of the community around. While many people would love the idea that their family could go walk the track, in the evening, maybe play on the field. And that's enticing for some, but how do we make sure that we preserve it, add trees, natural fencing, if you will, so that way it's not a burden to them. Again, just other depictions. The one in the middle would show if you added the auditorium and the aux gym to it. The one on the left is sort of an overview. It kind of shows how that property could flow. Again, sort of creating a campus feel to it. And then Todd is going to sort of get into some of the timelines here.
So as we've discussed, the OFC and the ELP program, that is already underway. We're already working with them to ensure we can be included in that program. The next step from the district, from the board standpoint, is to approve a master plan. So that's currently being worked on. We could potentially approve a master plan December of 2026. And again, as I mentioned, with that ELP program and to take advantage and lock in that state funding, we would have to have the community approve a levy to lock in that funding. We would have a 12-month window in order to do that. So theoretically, the earliest we would go on the ballot would be May of 2027 regarding this facilities issue. Assuming that the levy would pass in 27, we could begin designing the schools in the spring of 2027. July of 2027 is when OFC would officially accept our master plan, which would at that point lock in our funding, as well as locking in that state percentage share that I talked about, which right now is 54%, and hopefully it stays at that level. So again, then we would look at shovels in the ground in 2028, and then best case scenario, we would have construction complete at Creekview in 2029, and then construction completion of the elementary schools in 2030. So again, some of the things we talked about with the OFCC does, like I said, does create a little bit of urgency. When we talk about a ballot issue, going for a levy, that's not something we like to do. Nobody likes a levy, but when we do something like that, we don't want to have to come back. So that's why with this plan with the OFCC, we talked about the ELP program and that potential next building basically being covered entirely by the OFCC. This facilities plan would likely allow us to be one and done and not have to come back to the community for additional funding. I think that is all, unless there's anything else you wanted to add.
Yeah, just if I can, something that is I think important for the community to understand is once you pass that facility plan and OFCC signs off on it, you have 1 year locally to secure that funding. So that's a really important component because that state share allows us to really do so much more than what we could do otherwise. The other thing that is important is, and we asked the question from our industry experts today, what's the cost to a district if you wait even 1 year? And with inflation, the building costs, the industry is saying 4.5% increase in construction costs. So when you're talking about a $30 million building, that adds up pretty quick. So we think time is of the essence, and something that maybe we didn't tout enough, but we can't stress it enough this evening for the community to understand is that growth is coming, and we have to have a place to house our students. So with that, as Todd said, I think we've left at least 15 minutes for questions, and we'd love to answer any questions you may have.
Can you just explain to everyone kind of how, with the bond levy that will be falling off, how this kind of, what we're looking at as far as replacing that bond levy? We as a board have discussed this, and it makes sense to us, but to the average taxpayer, they're looking at it like, oh, this is going to be, $130, $150 million extra in taxpayer funds, which initially, yes, it may be, but ultimately it's going to be kind of a wash.
Yeah.
Can you explain that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm glad you asked. So all of the existing buildings that we have in the district were at one time paid for by a bond issue that the community funded. All of our existing debt on those buildings will be fully paid off in 2029. So what that means is currently, if you look at your tax bill from the county auditor, you've got 5.3 mils. That's levy language that's going towards paying off this school debt. So what that means is in 2029, when that's all paid off, that 5.3 mils goes away, which is in essence, your taxes go down. So what we're looking at is to basically looking into the future, address our capacity issues, address our aging buildings. In lieu of that millage falling off, we're saying, community, allow us to continue to collect that funding. So we'll be talking more in the future about the levy options we're looking at. We're looking at potential income tax option. So if, for example, if your income tax goes up by a set amount because of this new levy, you can look at your property taxes that will actually be going down by 5.3 mils. So the facilities portion of this levy ask that we're going to be looking at next year, in essence, it's really not going to be a tax increase. It's just going to be basically continuing to pay what you're currently paying, potentially in the form of an income tax versus a property tax. But again, that's yet to be decided.
And if I can, Todd, during the July board meeting, if you have a chance, go back and look at Todd's presentation, because he shared some scenarios. If the board elects to go with an income tax, that recommendation would be earned income tax only. Something that we've heard is, people are concerned about property tax values. People are concerned about their income that they have, right, and trying to make ends meet. But one of the things that has been stressed, and we hear it, is it can be really hard on the senior citizens. Earned income would not tax Social Security, pensions, things like that. It would just be earned income only. In fact, I would suggest, if you can, go back and look at his presentation, because there were some scenarios that show if you're a senior and you're not currently earning an income, your burden would absolutely lessen, because as Todd was sharing, some of those property taxes would start to come off the books. And so you'd pay less, and people that are earning an income would pay more, but they would also pay less property tax too, right?
I appreciate the timeline here that you guys gave. I'm just trying to figure out from the timeline, when would be the soonest we'd see students shift from current placements to new placements?
Yeah, so one of the thoughts we've had, preliminarily is in order to make this work, you'd have to start with Creekview, right? You got to make that so that it becomes a second middle school. And then once you do that, instead of K4 buildings, a 5-6 building, you'd have K5. So our elementary students, rather than shifting to Creekview Intermediate, they would stay in their elementaries for one more additional year before they would transition to what would be the new middle school. Looking at this, summer of 2030, I think is ambitious, but our team tells us that this is absolutely feasible. If this gets delayed, there's going to be inflationary cost for that. We know enrollment is coming. Can we get by until then before we have to redistrict and say, hey, Edgewood Elementary is now going to include this portion of this? And I'm just, hypothetically speaking here. We are probably going to have to tweak things between now and 2030. But as far as large scale, massive redistricting and all of a sudden an entire neighborhood that's accustomed to going to this neighborhood school going to a different one, obviously we don't want to have to do that unless we have to. But, there will be between now and the time that this takes place, we will absolutely have to revise our elementary district boundaries in order to make sure we can house all the kids there safely. Great question. When those shifts take place, would they take place mid-year? So one of the things that we heard today, actually, in looking at this timeline, is that if the ballot issue were to pass in May of 27, you could be into, we would have this completed in summer 2030. So in 3031 is the year that students would actually start. It would be an entire school year. We may have to look at something like in 29, maybe we get out a little bit earlier. In 2030, we go to school a little bit later, looking at the yearly calendar for that year to buy us a little extra time for punch out lists, things like that. But it would be our absolute desire that students and families would start a year in a building. Now there are some it does exist where sometimes the timing doesn't work out, and mid-year you might have students shift. That would be really disruptive here when we're talking about there would be a large percentage of our students. So we would really try to make sure that we're starting a school year off and we're not doing a mid-year shift.
And to piggyback on that, I think if in lieu of a May ballot issue, we were looking at a November ballot issue, then we would probably be having some discussions of it would be harder to make it happen. So then you would have to decide, do we push it all back an entire year or do we do it mid-year, which isn't ideal, but that would be probably a decision if we had to push the ballot back.
What is worst case scenario if none of it passes?
Worst case scenario if the ballot issue doesn't pass? Is that the question? I mean, like I said, the ballot issue is addressing two things in this facilities plan. You've got capacity and you've got aging buildings. So from the aging building standpoint, you're just going to have buildings that are continuing to get worse. We're continuing to pump money into aging buildings, whereas if you've got new buildings, you're not having to put new money into boilers and just putting more money into an old building. From a capacity standpoint, the slide that Zach showed earlier with Marysville East and Marysville North coming, the wording on there was kind of small, but if you look at the numbers, you're looking at over 1,500 housing units. And if you look at just averages, that equates to, could be anywhere from 1,500 to 2,000 students. So if we don't have additional facilities, we'd be looking at overcrowding of our existing facilities. That usually ends up in modulars. You'd start seeing trailers at buildings for students.
I think those are, from an economic standpoint, those are always a losing, by the time you lease or build those and then you have to get rid of them. It's always a losing thing. When I was in a previous district I was in, we had to do that, but it ended up costing the district more money in the end. The other thing is, and I hate to say this, but if you look at the enrollment there, we have to be able to house our students. And I hate to say it, and we are a ways away from this, right? But you could look at something like split sessions. I mean, you have to be able to house all of your students, and nobody wants to hear that. But the reality is, if you picture a neighborhood the size of Mill Valley, it's coming. We absolutely are going to need some additional facilities. In Edgewood Elementary, we'll buy ourselves a little bit of time if we can make this work, because we'll increase the capacity there than what we have currently.
Explain kind of piggybacking on that, if we don't get a ballot initiative passed to replace the bond levy and that bond levy goes away, what that does to our overall funding.
So if you look at it from our funding, we if it goes away, we don't necessarily need that funding anymore because our debt is paid off. So there's that, but in essence, we'd be pushing it down the road. So as opposed to asking our taxpayers, hey, can you just keep paying what you're already paying? We're not asking you for more. We would just probably have to come back a few years later and say, what now no longer looks like just a renewal, so to speak. Now we're asking for more. It's going to, more difficult to pass that type of a levy. And as Zach mentioned, also we're talking about 4.5% year inflation, so it's going to cost more to do the project, as well as we talked about the OFCC, the ELP program. We're going to be looking at a lower state share, most likely. So then we're going to be getting less help from the state to do the project. So again, going to be asking our local taxpayers for more.
This whole presentation is more or less a wish list. I like it. But we all know that we still have our wishes come true. So I hope you spent some time thinking about what if and what we might get by with instead of, for example, the building out on Maple Street, what used to be the high school, originally had no windows. I don't know if you realize that. It was supposed to have air conditioning, and then all of a sudden they couldn't afford air conditioning. And so that building sat there, well, I started teaching there in 81 and left in 90, so all that time, 100-degree weather and had no windows to open. We need to think ahead and not have that type of scenario again.
Yeah, I just wanted to kind of commend you because as you said, this is something that has been discussed for at least a couple years now. And, when you look at that timeline, you realize that it is something you have to plan far in advance for. And so I just appreciate all the thought that's gone into it, looking at the original recommendations and then the revised recommendations make a lot of sense to me. And I appreciate all the thought that's gone into this and wish you the best of luck. And I think, anybody who's here tonight, I hope you will talk to your friends and neighbors and encourage them to listen to this. I'm sure that Mr. Case over here will have a link to it on the Marysville Matters. But yeah, encourage people to educate themselves and as always, call the board office if they've got questions and get good answers. So.
Thank you. And, and I certainly offer to anybody that hears this, that's listening, would like to sit down and talk more about this, certainly receptive to that. I mean, the bottom line is we need input. We want that input. While this is it's a sort of a large plan, there's a lot that's involved in it. There's a lot of work and a lot of stakeholder meetings and groups that need to talk about the specifics behind it too, yet to take place. Are we close to 7 p.m.? I'm really impressed. Thank you. It was just bum luck, not on us. But thank you guys very much for coming out. Please pass the word. We'd love to see you at the next Let's Talk series. It's nice to be able to engage with community like this. So thank you very much.